Up here. So I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about the Warren Bridge project. It came to us at study session after years of effort. I've been the council stakeholder on this for about a year now, and it's a project I've really deep dived into. And I kind of wanted to give my perspective from being so involved in it for the past year and where I'm leaning. And I've really waited to weigh in publicly with my kind of preference until we got the entire input from the public and council was able to see this. But I think now's the time for me to kind of distill it down. So if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to start with my conclusions and I'll put them up at the end. And I got a bunch of slides here, so I won't dwell too long on some of them. You can read more in the packet. But distilling it all down, I got to stay publicly. Alternative 7 and 8, which is 14 foot on the east side or 12 feet on the east side and 5 on the west, to me are the only viable alternatives that really meet these project objectives and ensure safety and really the will of people. And so these are the two options I really think are viable. And I personally just can't support a 10-foot option. I think we need a minimum of 12, and I'll go into why. So starting with the next slide. So a quick little history of this project with council. Back in 2019, council accepted the $1.5 million funding for preliminary design work for improvements to the bridge and connections north and south. In April 2021, we had a contract with WashDOT for design of the bridge, which included a description of work stating that we wanted to get a desirable shared use path width of 12 feet in accordance with the WashDOT design manual. Next slide. August 2021, we approved our first contract with SJC Alliance, and that included in the description of work 4 preliminary alternatives, which was 8 foot on both sides, 10 foot on both sides, 12 foot on the west side with a south end tunnel for connection, and a 12-foot option on the east side. And of course, this is all for connectivity to tie in to existing bicycle networks and the bridge-to-bridge trail. In October 2022, we approved a contract modification which added specifically 2 alternatives. Again, 12 feet on the west side with south end tunnel, because that hadn't been studied yet, and a 14-foot west side with the south end tunnel. And then over the next about 6 months or so, a couple of other alternatives were added and studied, which included these 12 and 14-foot east side alternatives with and without a 5-foot ADA path on the west side. Next slide. And really, at the end of the day, we got all these alternatives on the table, which is fantastic. We studied a bunch, but there are really just 4 factors that are go or no go for each of them. The first one is it structurally feasible? Is the bridge going to fall down or not? Second one, is the bridge fully ADA compliant? We just kind of got the solid answer a couple months ago, but WashDOT does in fact require us to make sure both sides are ADA compliant. 3, is the bridge able to be inspected? The answer there is yes if it's 14 feet or less from WashDOT. And finally, is it within budget? And the budget numbers include both design, construction, and inspection mitigation for those that are 12 feet or wider. So when you do this, you eliminate a bunch of alternatives. You end up with 4. The first one, 8 foot on both sides. You might as well do 10 on both sides. So if we go to the next slide, this really leaves us 3 alternatives that are within budget and meet all the prior objectives. We've got alternative 2, 10 foot on both sides, alternative 7 with 5 on the west, 12 on the east, and alternative 8 with 5 on the west, 14 on the east. Again, these are all within budget. They are all viable, and it's now down to council to basically choose one of these 3 alternatives. Next slide. I did want to mention connectors. We've had a lot of discussion about this. Of course, we did pay for the contractor to study connectors, and they did, and so we have a lot of great options on the table. Personally, I've been convinced by Public Works Director Nucky's statements and others that indeed, I think we are best off spending all the money we have for this grant now on the bridge itself, and we can get state, federal grants for separate projects to establish these connectors later on. So I think I'm personally convinced of that now. That's the best path forward. Next slide. So why am I so adamant about 12 foot should really be the minimum? To me, it's safety. 10 feet to me is not a safe option, and it's not a modern option. 12 foot is really the de facto minimum. In fact, many bridges are built bigger. So one of the project documents references the Kitsap County Bicycle Facilities Plan, which says the minimum recommended width for a combined 2-way bicycle and pedestrian use is 12 feet for high volume usage. And gosh, this bridge should be high volume usage with all the development going into Eastside Village, the growth downtown. We expect it to be used quite often. WashDOT Shared Use Path Design Manual also says desirable paid width of a shared use path is 12 feet. And the SR 303 corridor study, which of course is the entire length of 303, really stresses the bridge-to-bridge connection, and that we're not going to be able to tell people only take one way on this path. People will use it both ways. People will be going both ways, north and south. And so that is the goal, is to have this one big path across all the water in this bridge-to-bridge trail. And I do want to point out that when you read that study, the final preferred alternative was based on one of the three initial options, which was multimodal, which did initially state one side option was just fine. Next slide. Just real quick, one-sided bridges are quite common. And in fact, even the bottom left, Kenmore, they redid their bridge. They left one side 5 feet, they expanded the other side to 16 feet. Most places do at least 12 for modern design. Next slide. And this is an example of a 10-foot bridge. You can just imagine people not only going one direction like they are here, but coming the other way. It's not wide enough, it's not safe enough. Next slide. And here's 14 feet on the SR 520. I've ridden this. You can see that those extra feet make a big difference. You can have people biking, walking, strolling both ways. Next slide. And I really dived into the public comments again. And a couple of statements I wanted to point out by looking at it. Twice as many online survey respondents said they wanted a 12-foot or 14-foot option versus 10. Only about 20% of respondents said that they use existing sidewalks and prefer the west side, so east side should be just fine. We've heard repeatedly from bicycling experts from several different groups that 12-foot is really the minimum safe width, and many have advocated for 14 feet. And 14 feet, I think, is important, especially considering the rise of e-bikes and scooters and all the traffic we hope to get on this bridge. And finally, 73% of comments that mentioned the preference in width advocated for 12 feet or greater from the open house. So I think the public has really spoken quite clearly that a one wide side option with ADA access on the other side is just fine. So next slide, I'll wrap up here. So again, same as the first one. I personally just can't support a 10-foot option. I think the right thing to do is this option A, which is alternative 8, do 14 feet and 5. Any extra money we get in the future grants can be used to expand that 5-foot west side. We're really not sure we're going to get the money until 2028. We got time, but do that. It's in budget. It'll work. It fits the majority preference. One thing I could accept is 12-foot east side, 5-foot west, and same thing. We're really close to getting to 8 foot on the west side if we do 12 in the east with the current budget. So I just wanted to give that synopsis to council, and I'll be talking about it next week, and I hope we stare at all these three options together. Thanks for letting me go a little bit over on my time. And with that, we'll now convene for 2 executive sessions.